webinar hosted by Reach Law. We're going to talk today about the Reach revision, and especially we're going to focus on what's happening this year, what's driving the change, and here we say how to influence it. We're going to have a bit of a broader look at what it means in strategic terms, not just in compliance terms, but we'll tell you also about what we already know and also a bit about what we don't know and what we can do about it. So I'll be your presenter today. I'm Head of Public Affairs here at Reach Law Finland, which means that I handle all those cases where you need to have a bit of a strategic thinking, not only with Reach, by the way, all the EU chemicals related files that you may have. You will see that with the revision coming up, it's more and more important than think beyond the pure compliance issues with maybe your individual portfolio, but also think big picture. And we're gonna do that together today. A bit more about Reach Law, who we are, global company with global reach. I am sitting here in Helsinki. This is our head office. This is where it all started, but you can see from this map that we quickly expanded to a number of markets where there are Reach similar type of legislation, Reach-like legislation. So India, Turkey, Korea are big examples, but of course, Ukraine is getting into the focus these days. And of course, in the UK, we have also operations there. So today we'll be focusing on what's going on in the EU, but don't forget, we have this international network of experts to support you. Reach Law, of course, is a shop with a number of different competencies on the global compliance side. So you have a reminder here of everything we do. It's also on our website. Most compliance related Reach and administrative Reach processes we cover. So again, if you have any specific needs, don't hesitate to reach out. But then on advocacy, we just wanted to let you know, because this is going to be our prime focus today. This is just a small flavor of what we do. Monitoring, stakeholder engagement, we're going to talk a bit about that today. Policy support in general, and what we like to call technical advocacy. So it's not just lobbying for a file or a substance, but it's knowing how to do it within the choreographed ways of ECHA, for example, or the Commission when you have public consultation, how to do it and how to succeed. And when you need to talk directly to public decision makers, we can help you strategize this. We have experience with that. We have a sub-team at Reach Law called the case team, where we specifically focus on those cases. So I'm assisted by colleagues who have done this before, Tim Baker, Tero Koski. You can find them all on the website. Let's remind you, before we go into the substance, that the Reach Law Talks channel is available on YouTube. All the good stuff that my colleagues and I have been covering over the past few years, not just for EU, you have tons of stuff also there on Turkey, Korea, and so on. You can find there, so tune in whenever, it's all free. This is our usual disclaimer, just to tell you that this is of course for informational purposes. So we urge you not to directly rely on the advice or the personal views that I will express in this webinar, but to, if you want sort of formal advice, we can do that like formally, but this is just a webinar for info purposes. Now let's just start with our agenda. This is what you've been waiting for. So today we are going to start with what's driving the change in the REACH revision. So we're going to give you a bit, I'm going to give you a bit of political context. What are the timelines for this revision? What you need to know to prepare, basically. And what we decided to do for you is to just give you reminders of pretty much what we know at the moment on the different titles of REACH, what's likely to change, but also sort of what's the likelihood of these changes. So we're going to go title by title almost and have then a section on digitalization and enforcement. But then what can you do about it? The public affairs and advocacy sides of things. We're going to try and keep this one, by the way, interactive, so it's going to be a bit merged with the Q&A. I think it's interesting to hear if there's any experience that you have at company or association level. I think it's good that we also share the knowledge, and I see that the chat is already active with a very detailed question about what's going on at the Commission right now and the fallout of the CARACAL meeting. That's exactly the kind of feedback that we want, to have like a good discussion, so we don't have to focus only on the slides. So thanks for that. We'll look at this one a bit later. For those who are not familiar, I sort of remind you of where we're standing in the current political climate, if you will, that the European Commission is operating under. We have a new or sort of renewed mandate for the European Commission, the executive at EU level. So renewed mandate for Ursula von der Leyen, but new team of commissioners, and they've already been busy as they always do when the sort of new term starts, to highlight what their general direction of travel will be. So this is just a cheat sheet. There's going to be a lot of those today, of what the so-called EU competitiveness compass is and how it sort of shapes the entire policy making at the Commission at the moment. So over the summer, there was a lot of talk last year on competitiveness with a report from Mario Draghi. You may have seen the headlines, the news. Some of you are also deeply involved in those. So this is just a reminder that the Commission has then sort of committed to come up with a number of packages of legislation to address this competitiveness, this perceived or actually probably real competitiveness gap that the EU has at the moment. So I'm not going to go through all of those. It's just to say that the chemicals industry is one wing, let's say, of this compass. So we have a chemicals industry package that is foreseen by pretty much the end of the year, and the REACH legislative revision is one part of this. It's not the only one. There is also been some commitment to enhance investment support to have better pathways to innovation for the industry. And of course, this chemicals industry package is also finds itself in the whole compass that we have here. There's also interesting initiatives with the Advanced Materials Act, for example, that the Commission has talked about regulatory sandboxes to test new technologies. So would you have sort of like limited regulatory requirements if you're innovating in a certain field, things like that. So it's important to always keep those bigger trends in the back of your mind when you're trying to be strategic about one specific product defense topic, for example, because it's easy to forget that the Commission commits on a lot of things, and you can sometimes poke your representatives at local or national level to try and get a bit more support from the EU. So on the back of that, at the beginning of the year, we then got a sort of more concrete commitment on timelines for the revision of the REACH regulation, in particular for Q4 2025. This is the so-called Commission Work Program. This is a communication that is every year the Commission sort of gives, well, the name is on the tin. That's the work program. So, and they usually try to stick to those timelines with varying degrees of success. But I think now it's safe to say that the REACH revision has been quite long overdue. So there's quite a lot of political pressure on the European Commission to get this done, get a proposal out by Q4 of 2025, because there's already been a number of delays in the previous term. There's already been announcements to that effect, and now they can't really delay it anymore. So here it says chemical industry package. We're talking about the REACH revision in itself. So yeah, it's both. It's going to come into the form of a chemicals industry package, but what we're going to see for REACH specifically is going to come in two forms. And this is important to remember, and that was announced by the Commission at the recent CARACAL meetings. We're going to talk about CARACAL. Some of you know what it is, some may be less familiar, but let's just start with this kind of pure kind of legal / administrative reality that we're operating under, because it's important for timelines and about what you can do as industry to input in the process. It's going to be, we're going to have a legislative proposal which is about the simplification, quote unquote, of the regulatory processes of REACH itself. For this, you need a legislative proposal that goes through the full ordinary legislative procedure that involves the Parliament. It's important because it's a piece of law, so you can't. It has to just go through the parliamentary process. It's just the legal text is changing, and the obligations of industry will change as a result. The same goes for enforcement provisions. So you can't do that with what we have on the right, a delegated act, which will not change the substantive way in which REACH works, but will change some elements of what you have to provide. So under delegated acts, the Commission will be able to propose changes to annexes to REACH, such as the information requirements. They've announced that without surprise, they would align with what's been done under the CLP, for example, for the new hazard classes, and so on. So when we talk about the delegated act, it's usually a shorter decision process. It's the so-called comitology. The Parliament is only consulted, but doesn't have to have a formal vote or several rounds of voting as it could be, as it is under the ordinary legislative procedure. And usually delegated acts then deal with more technical rules. So you're going to have different advocacy strategies for both. So to sum up on the legislative proposal, you're going to the top. It's going to be the Commission governing layers, commissioners, and the presidency itself, which means that it's more even the ministries, councils, and the Parliament when it comes to first reading, where if you want to input on the sort of whole way that REACH will work, that's going to be your level of engagement. On delegated acts, you engage at the technical level, so service level at the Commission, service level with the member states, because those rules are mostly crafted by people who work very close to the files. So you have much more chance to participate that way. But then we'll see a bit later, how can you do that? So in terms of timelines, you will recognize this. We've just retooled it a bit. If you have followed what happened at CARACAL, this was the big news in March and April, but let's start from the beginning. So the impact assessment that has been underpinning the whole REACH revision is being revised. And at the same time, the Commission is working on drafting the legal proposal, the actual piece of law. So that takes time, of course. And what happened in March, you may have seen your LinkedIn buzzing in all directions, was that there was a presentation at a meeting called the CARACAL. I don't know if everyone knows about the CARACAL. This is a meeting that's happening twice a year between the Commission, member states representatives from ECA, where the Commission is presenting a number of policy and regulatory topics for broader discussions. Industry can, in certain cases, also participate as observers, but they can also present directly issues that concern them. CARACAL does not have an official recognition. It's not a decision-making, a rule-making committee that is recognized in the REACH regulation. You can call it a policy talking shop almost, but it has become much more over the years. It is very much the outlet through which the big direction of travels are outlined. So of course, it's very important to follow it up, and but you can have access to the documents that are presented there on CircaBC, which is an open platform for anyone to access. That's where the Commission just uploads the documents. Now, what happened in March was that Commission officials, the civil servants who are working on the revision, have outlined what they would like to put inside the REACH revision. So there's a number of slides that you may have seen that have circulated, and where they highlight a number of ideas. There's been a lot of reactions to this presentation, notably if you contrast it with what we explained at the beginning, this whole push for competitiveness at Commission level. You're probably aware that the Commission has also met with the chemicals industry at high level and signed a declaration in Antwerp to support the industry and to also simplify the legislation. So it came as a surprise to some that the changes that were outlined by the Commission, or the proposed changes, the proposals that they would like in the legal text, do not look that much like simplification, or at least they look to as simplification in their own mind. So we're going to try and see what that means in the next slides. And then here, really feel free to give your opinion, because I really want to hear from industry, you know, how you perceive those upcoming changes. There was a period of consultation that was open until a few days ago. So some trade associations have sent their opinions, their position papers. We know that there's going to be also a high-level meeting and also high-level dialogues, I think, at political level in May on this. So watch this space. The big lines are still likely to move until the summer, and then the real it starts to get really concrete in the fall, where we're supposed to see two proposals, or at least two, one for the main legal text through the OLP, like I said, ordinary legislative procedure, and one proposal for the comitology changes on the information requirements. And then there's going to be an 8-week period of consultation. And that's just the beginning, of course. After that, we have in parallel the legislative procedure that will be, you know, on average it's 20 months, it could be longer for a proposal like REACH, so expect a couple of years at least of legislative process, and for comitology, probably a bit shorter. So we don't have the timeline here for that, but then that's kind of the next step and we'll be happy to tell you a bit more about that by the end of the year. But for now, that's what's happening this year. So there's a lot still, as you can see, a bit in the air, and we're going to hear a bit more around the summer. But now let's go into the meat of things, and you have maybe seen summaries online, or you've tried to make out what the Commission has outlined there in those CARACAL slides. We have here in visual format, so that it's just easier to consult. But I think for the real meat of things, I think you just have to kind of listen to me, and these are personal opinions based on what I know. But on registration, I've selected here things that I thought are maybe the biggest ones to my perception. The main changes are just to make the registration machinery, if you will, a bit more robust, and ECHA a bit more teeth to deal with the quality of the dossiers. So this validity period of registration for 10 years, for example, the capacity for ECHA to conduct completeness checks, these are just based on, I think, the very pragmatic realization by ECHA and member states that there's the good, the bad, and the ugly in the registration database at the moment. There's a lot of old data. There's a lot of data that that looks complete on the side of it, but isn't. The technical completeness check, the automated checks only go so far. So it's just important now, I think, for the Commission and ECHA to go a bit to the next level and have just more tools in the toolbox to dig into the database. And if you have done a good job, this will probably not scare you too much. Registration updates for those registered under the previous NORMS legislation, that's also probably a pragmatic thing to do. Registration revocation is a big one. There's always been a sort of weak link in capacities to enforce the incomplete or the lack of registration, sorry, the incomplete dossiers. ECHA never had the power to revoke a dossier, and member states didn't feel like they could do this until ECHA gave them a word that there was an incompliance. So something was just missing to go after those bad apples, if you wish. So this is a result of that. Dossier updates for substances of very high concern. That may be one maybe to look at a bit more in detail, because the Commission proposal is planning to make the SVHC much more, the SVHC list, the candidate list, much more prominent, let's say, as really the waiting list for further regulatory action, to make it more central. So it's going to have cascading effects. If this is really the case, it means dossier updates will be much more, I mean, there's going to be higher likelihood that you need dossier update if you end up identified as SVHC. So if we see more SVHCs identified, there's going to be more need for dossier updates. So you're going to have to be much more proactive in sort of monitoring what's going on there. And dossier with only FISCEM data must update. I think that's also, again, going after those that have gone a bit the minimalist way in their reach compliance in their dossiers. So watch out for these under registration. What's interesting is that there's proposed changes for how the actual risk assessment goes, and there we're going a bit more into the evaluation. So the big one is this mixture allocation factor for the substances above 1,000 tons per year. So there was a lot of hope from industry that this would kind of disappear from the Commission proposal, and it's there in the proposal. I think this one's going to be hotly debated in the next few weeks. We've seen trade association go hard after this. The sort of technical description of the AMAF, it's still, from what I understand, still a bit fuzzy how this would be done, and a sort of one size fits all formula to calculate cocktail effects of exposure for certain substances where you have likelihood of cocktail effect. So it introduces a lot of uncertainty for the industry, and I think we can expect that the Commission might have to curtail a bit, if not drop the requirement altogether. But I think they're trying their hands by just keeping it in the text. But one point to watch. Endocrine disruption, persistent substances, I think this is probably not going to move away because this is just to align with CLP. So I also would be surprised if this is controversial at industry level, but please tell us. Replacement of animal testing. So there's a timid push to get more in vitro testing accepted under REACH, and this is one of those where it's to align with the revision of the Animal Welfare Directive. So that's the prohibition of repeating animal testing is also for animals in embryonic stages. Small typo here. So it's interesting. It's making it broader. But overall, let's see what the Commission does to sort of push more adoption of in vitro testing. ECHA is scaling up, but let's see if the legal text actually supports or make this more still as complex as it is. Mandating of testing proposals for in vivo tests and complex endpoints, I think that's also an interesting one. To me, from my sort of policy side or legal side, it makes sense, but I'm keen on hearing if this is seen as a huge burden by industry. To me, it sounds like it's a good way to pre-check your strategy, but it might also push the compliance line a bit further down the line. So let's see, but it sounds also like one of those kind of sensible proposal. Now, the big one, polymer registration. I see that the question, I see a question in the chat about that. Someone asked, is it going to be for sure in the new REACH? Well, it's at least in this outline of a proposal, the polymer registration, or we should say actually notification. So here we wrote registration, but it's actually more of a notification. It's more than 1 ton per year. So here we try to break it into steps. Without going too much into detail, I think, yes, it was a bit of a surprise that it remained in there. There's still a lot that's in the air from the wording that they use, because this identification and these grouping steps would be carried out by the authorities and by ECHA, and they have so much already on their plate. And so it's one of those that looks a little bit like an unworkable white whale again. So their intentions, of course, is to catch a number of polymers that they consider should be under the REACH purview, but there's still so much that we don't know about this. And I think it's like for the MAF, we expect the lines to move here. This was such a shock. If we take the words from CEFIC, for example, that this is still in there despite the uncertainty, that we can expect that this is one of the bargaining chips of industry to try and make the, or like one of the points where they will seek to curtail it or to get a more reasonable proposal. Nanomaterials, it's also some vague announcements were made here, but just giving legal recognition to the 2022 Commission recommendation on the definition of nanomaterial. From a legal standpoint, also here, it kind of makes sense to just use what was kind of soft law to make it into the law and to clarify what information needs to be submitted for nanoform implementation. But here again, the devil is in the detail, and we would move from essentially a system where you have a bit of flexibility because the recommendation is not hard law to a system where it becomes hard law and you may have very differing interpretation whether you fall under the nanoform category or not. So here also maybe a question of preparation in your sector and to see, look again to the 2022 recommendation. It could be that some of the forms of the substances that you have registered, for example, fall into the definition, or maybe you've had those discussions at consortium level at some point, and maybe you need to reopen them if it becomes then a legal requirement. Authorization and restriction are a big one for us here at Reach Law, because this is simply something that we've been helping with, mostly on authorization. But what is interesting is that the Commission is moving now. If we just look at authorization in general, so it's clear that authorization is not dropped from the text. That's the first thing. You know, there were some radical voices to just say, shall we just get rid of it? It's not been working so great, and it's so much uncertainty for industry when you're under the process that it's safe to say that you'd rather work with rich restrictions, which are more predictable. And then it's kind of one-off in terms of when the regulation strikes, then you have to comply, whereas authorization are of course time barred and just put on you this sort of constant stewardship and compliance requirement. You have to revise your strategy every number of years. So the Commission is trying to fix, in light of the criticisms that were given on the authorization regime, make a more systematic use of RMOAs. So this risk management options upfront. It's a way to say that in some cases actually authorization might not be needed. So RMOA would actually come before. And for those who have worked with RMOAs from authorities, you know that they're a tool to sort of prioritize and decide whether it goes for authorization or restriction or another sort of another set of chemical legislation or regulation altogether. So here it's actually welcome that there's not this sort of systematic, you know, SVHC candy list, boom, authorization. Like that, there would still be discussions to consider. So we've been working on the chromates case, for example. This is a big example where it took years and years to come to the conclusion that maybe a restriction was better, and a lot of time was wasted, and now we're under a restriction process. The essential uses concept appears here. So for those who have followed this, would be this concept of getting blanket exemptions for certain number of uses that are basically essentially essentials to society. The criteria, it's still a bit in flux. If there's going to be a sort of one size fits all, how are you an essential use, or if you'll be able to kind of modulate it to your own case. But I think the advice we can give at the moment is whenever you're under an authorization or a restriction regulatory process, it's good to frame the defense of your substance under the essentiality argument already, because this is the language the Commission speaks. The email traffic light model, that's also, I think, an interesting proposal where, based on the minimal effect derived for your substance, you would have essentially modulated requirements applying to you. And we see that more and more in restriction proposals as well. So that's also something that would make sense to, if the Commission has this upfront in the regulatory option elaboration. So we could spend, we love authorization at the case team in REACH law because this is what we have done traditionally. So I could spend a lot of time on this slide telling you everything that's going to change. But I think it's interesting also to see that the Commission is trying to go through a more no-nonsense approach to try and tackle those that have large volumes, large number of users, and all those for which no alternative exists. So already at the prioritization stage, to avoid having those discussions later. How exactly they will implement that, it's still a bit our guess. We're not so sure, but at least the idea is there, and have some flexibility to exclude uses also more early on. So overall, to move a lot of the scoping discussions earlier and not have them, authorization application by authorization application, which has been happening in some of the cases. And overall, yeah, we try to show it in terms of kind of cogwheels here. They're just the Commission is just trying to get everyone's expertise to work a bit better with each other. So this idea of having those substitution centers where you have consultants and academia working together with industry and authorities to work long-term on substitution options and share ideas, good practice, but also actual case stories, case studies for substitution on individual substances, further developing the safe and sustainable by design criteria. These are all those ideas that are still present in this outline of a proposal, and to try and integrate all this expertise better in the authorization process. Now, this is where you might want to get critical and say, it's all, how do you make it more simple then? Is it really a simplification? So it's ambitious to, I think they're trying to solve a lot of things by creating a lot of more expertise all around the process. So it's going to be a real challenge for the Commission to convince us, but also to make it work in the legal text, that it actually speeds things up rather than creating more backlog in the system. So any of those wheels has a potential to also get gripped if anything doesn't work. So let's just see. For the moment, there's good intentions, but the message is certainly a bit mixed if we look at it critically. And finally, something we've maybe haven't seen that much on the sort of online commentary that you would see, or the position papers from industry, maybe a bit hidden at the end, but like the sort of good light at the end of the tunnel of this whole REACH revision is that there's a strong emphasis on making the enforcement just work better, just work full stop. One would be tempted to say, because this has been a real sort of a weakest link in REACH, that the customs authorities that are in charge essentially of checking when it comes to individual substances, the REACH compliance, have been a bit lacking the tools. So you all have felt the regulatory pressure way high, but the sort of actual control side of things, when things are really for catching those bad actors that give you all a bad name, has been kind of lacking because REACH has been difficult to practically enforce because it's a complicated piece of regulation. So there's really this sort of twin improvements that they're going for, that ECHA really can be like the first stop for the dossiers to revoke those that are just non-compliant, just bad, and for custom authorities to then be able to have more teeth when they can check if the safe data sheet here to formally request the registration authorization numbers. So a lot of these things that may be happening in some member states and not in some others. So just to make the whole provisions a bit more legally effective. And then here, a lot of ambition at Commission side to make things more digital and interoperable, also with what's happening on the product side, with the digital product passports. And those of you who follow the environment ESPR regulation on the environmental data of products may be familiar with this, the whole idea that substance information and substance content of products, that you could get this sort of information free flowing between product substances and all available for customs authorities to check, use of QR codes and the like. Very good ideas, I would say, in theory, but in paper, you can imagine the logistical challenges to make all of that work. So we need to see a bit the hard proposal to have an opinion. So now we have 15 minutes left, so we're just going to go quite short on advocacy and open the floor to your questions. But let's start with the big picture. It's a very simple message that we give you today. At the moment, on the REACH revision, the legal text itself, let's just say it straight. If you're not aligned at the moment with the big voices, that is the big industry associations who have been vocal on this issue, there's very few chance that you're shaping the final text. It's been, when we say the final rounds of drafting the proposal, right? It's been now years that this is in the making, so you're not going to change fundamentally how it's going to go. The big contours that we've discussed today, that's not going to move. But what's going to move is how ambitious those proposals that we've outlined are. Some individual ones may be retooled or dropped, but the whole revision itself is not, in our opinion, going to fundamentally change or be fundamentally dropped. In this day and age, of course, we can always expect things to get surprising, but let's say this is our analysis at the moment. Member states, major trade associations are still commenting on this and are active to have a proposal that is balanced. So this is where it's happening at big political level. The window of opportunity to really work on those hard concepts like essential uses, SSBD, whatever, and their place in the text. It's kind of closing soon, because once it's the ordinary legislative phase, it's going to be just that much harder to move the ship, the big ship direction. So it's important now that you don't act alone. If there are things that really are crucial for your sector in this upcoming revision, coalitions and sector platforms, you must be, a lot of you, members of trade associations. It's time to get closer to the action if you're not already. And sometimes there's associations of associations as well, big coalitions that defend specific interest of one sector. So if you're not already doing that, it's the smart time to do it now. And of course, if you're lost in the sea of association in Brussels, who is friend or foe, who is the one. You can always ask us for advice. We have some fluency in that world. So what can you still do, right? Raise your head above the clouds like this giraffe and prepare for the long term. Because now what's going to happen is not so much what's going to change about how reach works that's going to impact you on the ground that much. That's what's going to happen to your substance, your portfolio. And what we have hopefully seen at the beginning of this webinar is that the input giving process, the consultation process, is about to be much more formalized and choreographed, I would say, especially for restrictions that are becoming more and more the norm. So it means it's also much more structured in what you will need to provide, technically speaking. And we like to say here at ReachLaw that it's really about the data, not just tax data or environmental data, but also socioeconomic. A lot is about that. Substitution is also about making the case whether your substance should be used at all, substituted by something that is not a chemical solution. So you need to think like the regulators. This is how they think at the moment. So how do you do that? We try to make it very simple here. Your use case, it's going to be about defining uses. You have to be clear on what your substance is used in or for. And if you are clear to yourself, you are clear also to the regulator. We keep saying to our community of clients or colleagues, people in the public sector, with the best of their knowledge, they don't know. They cannot know all the uses. And under REACH, you have to provide certain information, but it's never enough. And the day that you become under identification for SVHC or future restriction, this is what's going to make the difference. It has to be explained like you explained to a relative, your grandmother, or people like me who are not specialists. Use case clarity. Substitution narrative, I think this is going to take you really in the long term a bit above the fray if you manage to articulate whether you can't be substituted at all or whether there's a plan, there's something along the way, but it's going to take time and it's difficult, it's expensive. Hard numbers, very important. Economic data feeds directly into that. The cost of substitution, the social impact of a restriction on the local economy, on your company specifically. So we have economists at ReachLaw who can work with us to get this data in the format that the regulator expects, because that's what's gonna make their job that much easier. Because now they really have to scan through, they're gonna have to scan through each uses and understand, are we wrecking the economy or not with this? I mean, if I put it like very schematic way. Sectoral grouping, we've just talked about that. You're just so much stronger when there's several of you together. Reach is pushing you to work together. So you have to do it. Sometimes it's difficult for competition or historical reasons. You may not have an association behind you, or the association's too busy, is not seeing what they should see under Reach. We can help with that. We can help you, association or not. It's important. Move together. So now we have time for the Q&A, and I can see that we have a few. So I'm trying to make this big. Sorry for that. It's written in a very small font. So we're going to start from the top. I'm not sure we can do them all, guys, but guys and gals, let's have a look. Someone asked about the CARACAL. There are many comments and complaints within the CARACAL portal about the proposed changes from the Commission. What do you think? How much will the EU Commission take into account the arguments brought forward by member states, industry, or other stakeholders, since the EU commissioners, especially Ms. Rosval at DG Environment, seems to be eager to provide a legal draft this year, so there would not be much time to engage in discussions with many parties. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what we were saying with the previous couple of slides, right? Time is tight. My guess is that there is already a pretty well developed draft of proposal, of course. The services have been working for years. DG Environment has traditionally been very proactive in crafting the drafts early on, already even for them internally. But they also traditionally go quite far reaching because they expect that there's going to be pushback also from other DGs and from industry. So my personal experience from also working there, would be to say to not be too spooked by what we have seen at CARACAL, even though it's scary for a lot of you. That this is also a way for DG Environment to show its hand in the process. But remember, these are just slides provided by one service of the Commission. So we've yet to see a proposal, as we said, but we don't know exactly how DG Grow inputted into this, or how much of this came to them even as a bit of a surprise. Let's see. They're supposed to do it together, but I think there's been a bit of a game between the two over the years. And then let's not forget that whatever proposal that goes through inter-service also involves other DGs of the Commission, and very importantly, the legal service. So if a lot of that stuff doesn't really work legally or is too uncertain, it might not even pass muster with the legal service. So it's something to consider also in your advocacy. Uncertainty is maybe something the Commission wants to avoid. So look at the AMAF, for example. Another question, are we expecting only a proposal for the revised REACH by end 2025? With it then following the OLP? So no final regulation for Q4 2027. Will there be some transition phases for the different elements? That's a very good question. So we are going to expect both the REACH legislative text, as I said, but also comitology proposal for the annexes amendments. So there's that, but I think you can see also many of the initiatives from the chemical industry package might also come through non-legislative measures, like those digital spaces for information on substances and things like that. And then as the timeline you indicate, Q4 2027, at best, it may take a bit longer than that, but I think you're in the right ballpark. There's currently a targeted consultation for CARACAL members. Do you think there will be another EU REACH revision consultation on the proposal that is open to all? So for sure, there's going to be the 8 weeks when the proposal actually comes out, the legal proposal that was announced already by the Commission. So that's what we know. Is it for sure that polymers notification will be happening? So none of what we've seen is for sure. If we want to keep it really, if we want to play it safe, all of these are just slides. But we can't just say that, right? We have to be honest and say all of that we've seen is not for sure, but a lot of it is likely. But like I said, I think I've answered that question a bit earlier in the webinar. Polymer notification, I think it's going to be one of those that gets hotly debated at a service level. So we'll see, and you might see it trimmed down as well, or make it less, less, let's say, broad in scope or effective as you have in this original proposal. So watch this space. We'll be following it up for sure. What happens when a registration is no longer valid? Would a registrant be required to re-register the substance? So cease manufacture. Should the manufacturer start again? I think this is a compliance question, and my gut feeling in the very limited time to that I have to answer would be to say yes, if you're in the tonnage under reach where you have to do it. But I would encourage you to send your question actually directly to us so that we look at your individual case and we help you out in a better way than I just did now. You do not quite, I do not quite understand, this is another question, the information that should be into the dossier if the substance is an HVHC and already on the candidate list visible. This would generate more bureaucratic efforts on industry side only. Yeah, that's a good one also to take to colleagues. Because I guess here what was meant is that if you have substances identified as SVHCs and the assumption is that maybe some registration dossiers are not complete. So there, it's one of the first steps you'll have to update. But if your dossier is already in good shape and compliant, normally the updates would be then minimal. But let's see, again, feel free to reach out if you have like a specific issue or specific issue to yourself to discuss with us. Will the ED, PMT, and VPVM required for any substance due to the proposal? I will also here refer to my colleagues and answer after this. I will not take a risk to answer this one on air right now. Also, again, my gut feeling would be yes, but let us get back to you on this one. What will be covered by OLP and by comitology? So comitology, we know for sure that the information requirements, exactly those, ED, PMT, VPVM, that's going to be comitology for sure. But that can be any technical change to the annexes. So if you have an annex change for the nanomaterials, for example, that would typically go through comitology as well. And OLP will be all the way in which REACH actually works, authorization reform, change of all the changes to the competencies of ECHA when it comes to registrations, for example, and the risk assessment changes, that has to be in the legal text, in the OLP. Do you think the MAF would apply to MOX and or UVCBs? I would like to ask the person who asked this question to no. Yeah, get back in touch with us as well. It's a very good question, and I've heard variations of it over the years. There's the two concepts are close, and to me, it's like a recipe for so much uncertainty and going around in circles trying to prove things that are very difficult to prove. So my response is I hope not. But then again, those substances that may have cocktail effect, they're also maybe more likely to be those that are those with these like broad compositional ranges and stuff like that. So yeah, we have to see what comes in the proposal, and I hope industry also comes up with something articulate about this, because it's a huge Pandora's box. So thanks for this one. Would these new changes increase the administrative burden on industry and SMEs? In short, yes. I think it's fair to say that you will have much more direct compliance obligations as a result, because REACH is just getting a bit sharper. But also, as we've seen, there's much more tools for prioritizing substances and making them either SVHC or subject to a restriction proposal. That stewardship and long-term planning, like the giraffe, will be essential. I think we have passed the time. and thanks for those who have stuck with us. So we're going to get back to you in writing for those additional questions. We're really happy for the engagement that you have seen, that you have shown today. Let's take this one offline, and yeah, have a very good day, everyone. Thanks a lot.